Welcome to the podcast. We Do Recover with Jared Miller, your host.
And I'm Dr. Terry Sellers, your co-host.
This is a podcast about recovery from addiction.
We want to talk about what successful recovery can look like.
Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center, Rise Up Subs, and the St. George Hilton Garden Inn.
Welcome to episode 158, everybody. Today is January 17th, 2025. I hope everybody is sticking to those New Year's resolutions, the New Year's goals, whatever you got going on in your life. I myself didn't really set any New Year's resolutions per se. I set intentions. My intention was to be a little bit more mindful because I tend to be at work and thinking about my wife and then be hanging out with my wife and thinking about work, right? And so just the be here now is kind of the New Year's resolution for me anyways.
I love it.
Yeah. So today is going to be an amazing podcast. I'm super excited for this. I have a guest here, Stephanie Anderson. She's coming on the podcast today to talk about the book her husband wrote called Dear Addict. Her husband's name is William Todd Anderson. And this is pretty near and dear to my heart because some parts of this have touched me very deeply. I knew Todd, and so, yeah, I'm excited for this. One of the things that I asked Stephanie as we were kind of sitting here before this thing kicked off was, what's your intention with this? So I'll ask you right now. Will you share that again?
Yeah. So my intention is to reduce the stigma around addiction and to get people having conversations about it. And by being vulnerable through Todd's book, and, I self-published it after he passed, so vulnerability on my side as well, to try and help others do the same, to talk about what's actually going on in their homes and to get help so that people can live.
Beautiful. And I said to her, that is what this podcast is all about. So you're in the right spot. And
Great.
Thank you so much for being willing to come on.
Thank you.
Before we jump into this, so we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about you and Todd's relationship. We're going to talk about, your side of things. We're going to talk a little bit about the book, lots of different stuff. Before we jump into the meat and potatoes of the episode, this podcast wouldn't be possible without our sponsors. We love them. Our first sponsor, Steps Recovery Centers, is an adult substance abuse and mental health provider. Steps Recovery Centers provides all levels of care. They have a medical detox facility, multiple residential treatment centers, and outpatient services reaching from the top of Utah to the bottom. Recovery starts with you, and at Steps Recovery Centers, there is always hope. If you or a loved one is struggling, please call them today at 801-800-8142 or visit their website at stepsrc.com to learn more. Episode 158 is also brought to us by Rise Up Supplements. Rise Up Supplements is a nootropic line aimed at optimizing brain function and supporting mental health. They have two powerful nootropic blends. Mindful Mood helps decrease anxiety and enhance mood, while Mind Shift helps increase focus and optimize brain function. Place your order today at riseupsups.com. We appreciate them sponsoring this podcast. Okay, Steph. Sponsorship mentions are out of the way. What I would like to do is just let's just start off at the very beginning, right? A little Q&A format here. First question. Can you tell us a bit about your journey with Todd? What was he like before addiction entered your lives?
So Todd and I started back in high school, and he was actually in 9th grade. I was in 10th. He'd come and pick up his friends from school, and he saw me.
What year was this? Give us a timeline, Steph.
82.
Okay.
1982.
Okay.
And could have been 1981, but right in there. And he would come to pick up his friends and sit on the front bench in front of Murray High School. And I would be ditching the end of 7th period and kicking my little boots down the hall. Anyway, but we both noticed each other. It was love at first sight. But it wasn't for another year that we would end up dating. And so our first date was homecoming, 1983.
Wow.
Yeah, or 82, 1983 or 2, something like that.
Nice.
Anyway, and so we dated in high school, and then for a long time. And then we parted ways when I graduated and went off to college. And he partied a little bit, so I was like, I don't know. So, but it was mostly because I was going off to college, and it's just a big gap.
Yeah, life happens at that
Yeah.
age, and people get pulled apart for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it wasn't until 22 years later that we reunited after a chance meeting with his parents at Costco. We always kidded you could get anything at Costco. And then it was love at first sight again. We ended up getting married 4 months later. And
Beautiful.
yeah, and so I knew that he had addiction problems and some of the roads that he had gone down. I didn't understand that addiction was a lifelong thing. So he was running a successful company, owned his own place, had a nice vehicle. Everything looked good.
Well, and to be fair, I knew Todd for several months, and he's a go-getter.
He is.
He is a very, like, when that man sets his mind to something, you can, if you're standing between him and his end goal, you're a road bump because
Yeah.
that guy's going for it.
Yeah, I'm glad you could see that in him too.
In fact, a lot of times our conversations would be, Todd, slow down, right? Like, let's live in today. Take a breath. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. Thank you for bringing us up to this point. What were some of the turning points in your relationship as you guys both navigated the struggles with addiction? How did you even first find out that it was something? Because I get it. If you're not familiar with this world, if you're not familiar with substance abuse and mental health and some of this stuff, and you're just kind of out living life, a little naive because you haven't experienced it, you see movies, people go away to somewhere for treatment, and then they come back, and life
Yeah.
goes on. And so when did it really kind of start to pop up and you notice red flags or warning signs?
Yeah, so we got married, and he had had some sobriety underneath him at that time, and what I thought was 7 years. But he got in an accident right when we reunited, and I spent a week at the hospital. He was in intensive care, and I was his advocate.
What kind of an accident?
A motorcycle accident. He was a
Oh.
motorcycle racer.
Okay.
Yeah. And he was life flighted to LDS Hospital. And so anyway, I was aware and worried, could he relapse? I was kind of relying on the family to see if they saw any signs, which I didn't get a lot of help there. And so it was well over a year before I realized. I thought, he just spends a lot of time in the bathroom. We got married later in life, trying not to bother him too much about him, being in the bathroom.
Right.
Anyway, and then things.
So did you know before the accident, before the motorcycle accident, was your guys' relationship such that you had conversations about what chemicals he struggled with? Right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
some people, I think the general public, when they hear somebody has an addiction, they just automatically assume alcohol. And maybe today, hopefully, they're a little bit more aware. But
Yeah, I knew
so
it
you
was
knew it was
opiates.
opiates.
Yeah, I did. And I was worried about the pain pills. And at the time, I only thought pain pills. I didn't know about street drugs. And, I knew about them, but I didn't think that he had used those. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
So I was mostly worried about the pain pills from the doctor, being prescribed, and how does he wean off, and does he just wean off? And so he would tell me, I'm weaning off. And so I would give him time to do that. But then at some point, I finally just put my foot down and said, you have to go to treatment, or I'm telling your family that you've relapsed,
Okay, so there's a lot there. Let's diagnose that and dive into that. First of all, one of the big ones that you said there was noticing the bathroom thing.
Mm-hmm.
My mom always busted me because when you're trying to, do all the stuff that we don't want to get into on the podcast, you shouldn't be in the bathroom for that long, right?
Right.
So that's a warning sign for loved ones
Mm-hmm.
who might be living with someone who's struggling with addiction problems.
Yeah.
Were there any other because oftentimes we talk about unmanageability, outward unmanageability, the inability to kind of participate in life. So missing doctor's appointments, not showing up to family events. Were there any warning signs with that outward unmanageability early on?
Yeah. He still showed up to events because I think he was excited to be with me and he wanted to keep this relationship. Todd would do anything to protect his addiction, including showing up to events. But later, he didn't show up to events. So that is a huge red flag. You know, being absent, being late, crazy stories that sound like lies. I mean, a lie just sounds different.
Right.
So what I wanted to try and be careful of is to not be like the frog in the boiling water where, you know, over time the water gets hotter and hotter and hotter and you're scalded. But really there were signs all along the way. And it's easier to see them when you look back than when you're living it day to day. So that's another one of my messages is to wake up, you know, have the family members wake up, pay attention, do what they can to get help, which I don't even know all the answers for that. You know, I'm constantly learning and trying to figure that out. But I didn't know. I kind of felt like I was on my own and I didn't really know what to do.
Sure. I bet some days you felt a little cuckoo.
Yeah.
Right? Like, talk to me about that. The trying to balance, like, supporting Todd and at the same time taking care of yourself. And listen, us addicts, because our brains tell us that if we don't get the chemical, we're going to die. It's a lie. For sure, it's a lie. But in our mind, I always say, try telling an addict that, right? Somebody in active addiction. Try telling somebody in active addiction that, because their brain has correlated that substance with life and death, unfortunately, right? And so we start to be creative, and we really don't want to hurt those we love. We also just want to survive at the same time. So we get in these situations where we have to be manipulative, where we have to tell lies, where we have to come up with these crazy, outlandish stories, right? So I'm sure I could imagine that would have been really hard for you to balance supporting him, believing your husband, because you want to believe your husband, and at the same time, like, taking care of yourself. What did that look like?
Yeah, it's pretty tough. So we were married 16 years, and for probably, 14 of those, he was using. That's a long time. There's a lot of history there. So in the beginning, it was totally different than later. And, you know, I think the thing that bothers me the most is sometimes I think we were fighting about our relationship when we actually weren't. We were fighting about the addiction.
Yeah.
And all that encompasses that. So it's hard to have this book out there and be like, here, this is Todd's life in addiction, but you could write a whole nother book about the great person that he was as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, but the craziness while in addiction is really hard. And I went to a 12-step program early on, but I was like, I don't want to come here. It's his problem. Why do I have to be here? This is so dumb. And so I didn't go for a long time. And then I went in again later, crawling in, like, please save me.
Like a program for the family members.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like Nar-Anon or Al-Anon.
Al-Anon, yeah.
Al-Anon, okay.
Yeah. So
Talk to me about that. What was your first experience like going to an Al-Anon meeting? Did you feel...
Yeah. I didn't really like it, and I think, I don't know, I just didn't like it. I can't really explain why, but I also didn't go 6 times like they recommend. You should go 6 times, you know, and give it a good shot.
Don't let me pry too hard here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But if you're okay to sit with this experience, let's be curious. What was it about it that you didn't like? Looking back, can you maybe in hindsight see you were a little bit naive or a little bit like weren't completely sold that this was going to help? Skeptical?
Yeah. Still thinking that it's his problem and not mine.
Okay.
Also being pushed to go.
Who was pushing?
A friend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Somebody that cared about you, that saw you were in a hard spot.
And they did talk about it out loud at a restaurant, which kind of made me mad.
Oh, they talked about you going?
Just that in general, which made me uncomfortable at the time. Now I don't think I would be as uncomfortable. So it's just a combination of things.
Can I just say that you have so much courage to do this?
Oh, thank you.
Because I can seriously, like, as I sit here, like, I love my family. I love my family. Born and raised, you know, Utah family, LDS religion, not that that has anything to do with it, but some of these topics are very hard for people to have. I try to joke about my loved ones, right? Like, you know, when we're playing, let's say, spades, I'm like, I've been to jail. I know how to whip you at spades, right? Like, and talking about these things, it's really hard for people because it's so taboo and it's so, I can just tell, and I respect it, but I can tell that it's so uncomfortable. Obviously, fast forwarding today, it's a lot more comfortable, but in the beginning, it was hard.
Yeah.
And so by you sitting here and saying it was hard for me to have that conversation, especially in an open format like a restaurant.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
A lot of courage. I got a lot of respect for you to
Thank
sit
you.
here and talk about that for sure.
Thank
I
you.
also cut you off, so I apologize.
No, that's okay. So I didn't really go back for about 3 years, I think. And a lot happened in those 3 years. Todd lost his company, it was taken from him. Yeah, that was a really, really difficult time. We had people turn their backs on us. And that's the thing. It's not just people turning their back on the addict. The family gets treated poorly as well, and their backs turned on when they're not even the ones causing the problem, per se. They have to suffer these consequences. So I did crawl into Al-Anon later, and I wish that I would have stayed because I learned so many great things. I stayed longer because of it, because I learned about detachment. I didn't know how to love and not love. That was the biggest thing. How do I love love this person but detach from these problems? And that was pretty powerful for me. And I was working on myself. So I kind of just put the relationship on the back burner at some point. This is many years later. After 2015, 2013.
Can I ask you a quick question? Just so that it makes sense in my mind. You were married for 16 years.
Yeah.
He was using for 14 of them. At what point in what of those years did you kind of, okay, this is for sure what's happening. If you don't get help, I'll tell your family. You start looking into Al-Anon. Is it year 2? Is it year 10? Or could it
a
be
couple
10
years
because-
in when I said you need to go to treatment, 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
It took a while for me to figure it out because we were traveling all over the country for work. Everything seemed normal. Like if you knew Todd, like it seemed normal. Like if he was using, it just seemed normal. But it does seem like after his business was taken from him and we moved to Colorado like 2015-ish, that's when I found Al-Anon again. And probably the first time was 2012, maybe. Yeah. So about 3 years later after that, I found Al-Anon. I think once he added Xanax to his regime, that's when more problems presented themselves, where it became more uncontrollable, like out of control. And a lot of times he would get in an accident and then he'd be back on the medication and then trying to get off and then maybe a treatment center. So it was like this cycle of always believing that he could get off or that it was because of this accident or something. You know, he had a bad back. Oh, his back, he had back surgery. You know, he had several back surgeries.
Which some of that stuff's just real life.
Yeah.
Right? Like that, it's tough. And I think a lot of people who, myself included, you got to be real cautious when you get injured, right?
You do.
Vehicle injuries, back injuries. Yeah, it's a scary thing because it's a real slippery slope once you get back on some of these medications and you have a neural pathway that you've had for years that tells you, your brain tells you we need more and more and more and more and more.
Yeah.
Stronger, right? Talk to me about, so, okay, let's step into this little, as I call it, segment 2 here.
Okay.
Todd's legacy. Before Todd passed, he wrote the book, Dear Addict, right? Can you share what inspired him to write it and what message he hoped to convey? Had you guys had that conversation?
Yeah, we had. So since like around 1998, I'm guessing, he knew he needed to write this book. And it was always in his mind that he needed to share his experience to try and help others. And so he would talk about it. And I actually wrote a book about how sport has been this constant in my life of ups and downs. And so I knew some of the things and I could help him. And so I said, why don't you just write everything? Almost kind of like a fourth step. Just write everything. And then we'll edit and take things out later. And this was after he came home from almost dying 2 different times from overdose. And his mind opened up, and he just knew he had to get it done. And so he would work on his cell phone. He wrote the whole thing. It was over 700 pages. He wrote it on his cell phone. I have it right here, the original manuscript.
Let's see that.
There it is.
That is a thick binder.
And that was all with his 2 thumbs. And he wrote it in roughly 2 months. He liked to do things the hard way, I guess. And he had lots of notes in his phone, lots of random notes he wrote down on pieces of paper, text messages he sent to himself, little notes. So he was so happy when he finished writing it. I mean, he was beaming. Like, he built a $15 million company. I said 13 in the book, but I realized that they sold it for 15. He got nothing, not 1 penny from it. But they blamed it on his addiction, but really there were lots of lies around it, and I don't want to get into that. And they had problems of their own. So anyway, it was just unfairly done.
But that speaks to the type of man he was. Like,
Yes.
you've got to have some dedication, work ethic.
Yes.
Right? There's some qualities in there that it takes to build a $15 million company.
Especially when he came out of prison, he had nothing. And I mean, nothing.
Did he go to prison for substance abuse?
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so with just the belongings in his car, he drove to Vegas and started this company, you know. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, so writing this book he was most proud of that. Like, he feels like he accomplished what he came to earth to do, really. And he had some recordings where he said, gosh, I'm really tired, but my mind just keeps opening up, and I have to keep writing.
Wow.
So,
Was he at a period of sobriety at this point?
he was. So it was during the time that he knew you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was all during that time he wrote it, in March and April of 2022.
The 3 things that he was fixated on. 1, his biggest motivator, I hope it's okay that I share this.
Oh, yeah, no,
but
you're great.
When we had conversations, his biggest motivator was not to lose his marriage,
Oh,
right?
so
like,
sweet.
we had conversations about that, and you were you were the biggest motivator for him. 2 was this book. He always talked about the book.
Yeah.
And then 3, he was starting a solar company.
Yep.
So those were the 3 things that he was very passionate about, and the man was on fire.
Yes, he was. He was. I'm glad you could see that and that he shared those things with you. Because he was sober. He was on fire. You guys tested him. I tested him. I know he was sober during that time. But then something happened, and he went to the doctor and got back on Xanax for anxiety. And the rest was history.
Last time I heard from Todd, he was, I think, discontinuing services because he had started this solar company and he had to travel.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure was the conversation that we kind of had. Yeah,
it's unfortunate
in
that
hindsight, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you never know, because somebody like Todd, who's built a successful company, he's an entrepreneur, like, dude's writing a book, you think like, okay, this isn't outside of a normal thing for a guy like Todd.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's not that far out there. Maybe somebody who's, I don't want to sound degrading, but somebody who's worked in fast food their whole life, if they're like, hey, I'm peacing out and going to Texas to start a solar company, that kind of sounds irrational, right?
Yeah.
Somebody like Todd, it didn't sound that irrational. We're coming up on a break here, a midway break here. Couple of the things that I got some more stuff I want to dive into.
Okay.
We're running out of time here, but I will say that I think that it's beautiful that you're able to take what he finished and come on and share this message and spread this. And I hope that you continue to do it. You said that you've kind of had some doors kind of close in your face.
Yeah.
This is not a topic that's out there that a lot of people are like stoked to talk about because of that stigma. So I think it's beautiful that you're willing to come on here, share his book, share his message. I think all of us that have been through it, like that cheesy saying, if I could just help one other person,
I know.
right? Because it's a killer, literally.
Yeah, he said that if he did help, I know it is cliche, if he helped one person, it'd be worth it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, episode 158. We're going to break here. We will be back after the short little message from our sponsors, Steps Recovery Centers.
You are listening to We Do Recover with Jared Miller and co-hosted by Dr. Terry Sellers. We'll be right back after this short break with more of We Do Recover with Jared Miller. Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center, Rise Up Subs in the St. George Hilton Garden Inn.
If you or your loved one is trapped in the cycle of addiction, there is a way out. At Steps Recovery Centers in Utah, we believe in second chances and new beginnings. Our evidence-based treatments, compassionate staff, and supportive community guide you on the path to recovery. It's time to reclaim your life. Take the first steps towards freedom, resilience, and a brighter tomorrow. Reach out to Steps Recovery Centers today. Recovery starts with you, and with Steps, there is always hope. Call us or visit our website to learn more.
We welcome you back to We Do Recover with Jared Miller, co-hosted by Dr. Terry Sellers. Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center, Rise Up Subs in the St. George Hilton Garden Inn. And now with part 2 of our podcast, Jared Miller and Dr. Terry Sellers.
Welcome back, everybody. Okay, episode 158 is underway. We got Stephanie Anderson here, and she is doing a phenomenal job. This lady has so much courage. I have a lot of admiration for her. We're going to jump back into episode 158. Before that, though, if you or your loved ones traveling through southern Utah, go to Google, type in the Hilton Garden Inn, St. George, Utah. They would really appreciate a shot at your business. They are one of the sponsors of this podcast. They are amazing. Always have the cleanliest rooms. I love it. The door's open. You walk into the lobby, and you can just smell that it is clean, it is bright, it is fresh, spacious rooms. Give them a shot at your business. It's always sunny and bright at the Hilton Garden Inn in St. George, Utah.
Did you say cleanliest?
Cleanliest. Is that a new word? Did I just come up with a new word?
Yes, you did.
I'm pretty impressive sometimes.
I'm not sure you can get a double word score on Scrabble with that one, but that's a new word. Congratulations. Would you say cleanses? Cleanses?
Cleanliness?
Cleanly.
I don't know, Donovan. Rewind it. We'll figure it out later.
The cleanest.
Yes,
they have high qualities of cleanliness.
Well, not all of us are as professional as you. Oh. But seriously, it really is. Have you ever been there?
Yes.
It's awesome. They got the lemon water and all that. It's bougie.
The lemon
nice.
water.
Lemon water.
What is it? Water?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Stephanie, thanks for putting up with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay.
It's my pleasure.
Let's dive back into this. Again, thinking from Todd's perspective, right, and kind of the legacy that he wrote. He literally wrote this book, and like you said, as he was going through it and doing it, the 2 months he was doing it, over 700 pages. That binder's thicker than thick, right? Super thick. I would agree, in knowing him around this time period, that he felt like he had to get this down. Like this was, call it intuition, call it whatever you want, but he was very passionate about it, very driven about it. He wanted his story to be known, no matter how the ending came to be. And it's still not over because we're here talking about him today, right?
I know, right?
Okay. Were there any particular chapters or passages in the book that resonated with you, and why?
Like resonated in what way? Like
that you felt kind of maybe heartfelt or surprised or...
Oh, yes. So this is interesting. So you know how I mentioned that it's kind of like a fourth step. He wrote everything that he had kept inside.
Mm-hmm.
So he got it out of his system. And then we sat in the living room with my parents, and I read the book out loud.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, with Todd in the room. And so we could pause at any time and talk about any part of the book. And so there were times, like one time I was staying at my parents' in Tokerville, had a triathlon the next morning, and I would get these little intermittent calls from Todd. Didn't know what was going on. It's the story when he was in New York, and it was pretty horrific what was happening to him. But I'm just getting these little calls. I'm pretty devastated. I don't know. It was bad. When you read the story, you'll be like, oh my gosh. But anyway, all I knew is that he wasn't making it home. He needed to get home. I didn't know where he was. I didn't know what was happening. I was mad that his phone was dead. I was mad that he couldn't just talk to me. You know, I had a race the next morning, which I still went and did. One thing that I really strived to do in the midst of all of this was still live my own life. I know it's really hard to do, and there were times that I didn't want to live.
Is that something you learned from Al-Anon or a friend or?
You know, it's something deep within me.
Okay.
I remember the old quote, life is not a dress rehearsal. Like, we get one chance to pass through this day. What are we going to do with it?
Yeah.
And I just live by that. You know, anyway, but I did. I went and did that triathlon, but I was worried sick, always worried sick about him, but not to the point where I didn't still live my own life. But there were times that I didn't want to keep living either. I do want to say that. It's pretty rough. Because we felt so alone at times. My family was pretty supportive, but it's hard. You don't want to talk about it sometimes because you don't want to be told to just leave that person.
Right. Yeah.
Because they could turn out great. Look at you. Look at the life you've created. That's what Todd and I wanted to do. Is he wanted to finish the book and then go out in the world and speak to people and speak to groups. And he's a dynamic speaker. He would have been phenomenal.
Oh, no question.
Yeah.
No question. No question. And maybe that's why he had this intuition to get this book finished.
Yeah, he
Right.
just knew he had to do it. I mean, literally, he almost died so many times, like 10 times or more. But 2 times, in just a short minute prior to getting it done. And then he dies after. Like, this book was meant to be.
Yeah.
And that's why, even though he passed, I just worked on it with my co-editor, Doug Sensenig. And we went through all the notes, all the recordings. In fact, an interesting thing is our stuff was all in storage because we moved to St. George in a fifth wheel. I was a flight attendant at the time. We didn't know exactly where we wanted to live. So we thought, well, we'll live in the fifth wheel for a minute, see how I can commute out of here. And so it wasn't until about 1.5 years after he passed that I got everything out of storage. And in there was a file box from when he was in prison, letters, legal records, and his accounting. I did fact checking on all of his stories. And there is one particular story in there where he's being chased by a policeman and he gets away. And you're just like, there's no way that this story could be true. There's just no way. And there it is. So Todd writes it from his memory.
Yeah.
And it's almost 100% verbatim. Like, he may have missed 2 exciting parts, which we put into the book, but it was incredible. Like, the accounting that he had while writing this book,
and
the timeline and all the details that happened.
Yeah.
And there it is on a police record in detail. So I don't know, kind of some cool facts for you.
That is cool. That is cool. And I imagine, right? Like, I imagine as you're reading it, everybody has their own thoughts, their own feelings, and their own perceptions, right? And so from the perception standpoint, he had his perceptions, which he recorded in the book. And then you're going through life with him during these times that he's writing all of these memories. But because you will have your perception, I bet it was crazy, like you're talking about, to read his and be like, oh my gosh, that's what was happening at this time.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, it was so
wild.
crazy to be like, oh, so that's what happened. Like,
Was there parts in it that upset you and you wanted to maybe kick him in the butt?
I think I was past that at that point. And I know
Past
it
the
sounds
anger?
weird. I was so proud of him for getting sober. I was so incredibly proud of him for being vulnerable and writing this story and the excitement that he had. And my dad has Alzheimer's, and Todd would get up every morning and take my dad on a couple-hour field trip. He was contributing, we were living with my parents at the time to help. And because of the pandemic,
Yeah.
housing prices, all that. So he did a lot to help. And so I was just so incredibly proud of him. And I told him when he came home that last time, let's just move forward. Let's just move forward from here.
Got you. It's beautiful. Yeah.
But, it's still hard to hear some of the stories because you're like, oh, gosh, I wish, sometimes you wish you could have done things different.
Yeah. You truly love the guy.
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
He's amazing.
Somebody shared some stuff that could get him in trouble, and you were willing to just kind of let it go and say we're moving forward.
At that point, because we'd
That's
been
huge.
through so much.
Yeah.
I mean, so much.
So how do you? So you got the book now, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're in the process of trying to get into treatment centers, public outreach, anything that really ties into recovery in the field of addiction. How do you see this book kind of contributing to that, or in what avenues, if somebody's listening to this, would you want them to reach out to? I mean, would you be willing to go and talk to? Community center or different organizations. I know you've come and you've talked to like the clients at Steps before.
Yes.
You're on my podcast talking about it right now.
I know.
How do you see this book kind of contributing to the recovery community?
Well, I think it's important for people who are in addiction to read it, to kind of see what can happen and the chaos reading somebody else's story. I think it's kind of a wake-up call. Also, people who might be dabbling and wonder what could happen to them, And then I think the general public, a lot of people have read the book that haven't been so closely touched by addiction. And, it's a doorway to say, hey, this is a real person that hurts and has these issues and their family suffering too. How can we extend more love? How can we have more compassion? And then Todd really wanted to write it for the loved ones to understand what it's like to be an addict and kind of some of the decision making, even though it's not the best decision making. But just to see, the beautiful thing about his book is every question or every chapter starts with a question that a loved one would ask an addict. That's why the book's called Dear Addict. And so it kind of gives you an inside view of an addict's mind.
Yeah.
And then in the back of the book are additional questions. So that's the beauty of the book. It is educational as well. Then he goes back to his mayhem story,
Got you.
which has woken up a lot of people.
I think anybody has a loved one who's struggling or maybe suspects,
Yes.
I think this would be a great book for them because, you only have, again, we talked about everybody has thoughts, everybody has feelings, everybody has perceptions. You only have your perception. And so if you have a loved one who's struggling and you're frustrated and don't know what to do, and maybe reading this and hearing from Todd's perspective around the questions that you would have for your loved one would be helpful for you just to gain insight on what are they going through.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I always tell people when working as a counselor, when we talk about trauma, people are like, oh, I don't have any trauma. Are you kidding me? You've spent the last how many years in substance abuse? Like that's traumatic by itself.
Yeah.
Right. So being able to get somebody who's going through its perception of it could be eye-opening for you to maybe just, if anything, have more compassion, understanding. Because this is one of those things where it's a disease of choice, still a disease though. And people can become very apathetic about it and towards it.
Yes.
So let's move into some of that. Let's move into like coping, advocacy, and just some hope. Losing a loved one to addiction is obviously devastating, right?
Yeah. It's the worst thing.
I was about to say I could imagine, but I know that pain. I have a brother that I've lost.
Yes, I did know that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. What has helped you cope and heal over time? You talked about you were kind of over the anger stage with Todd, when things came out from his book, right? And you're like, today, moving forward, we're just new chapter. Like, how have you, looking back, because it's been a few years, how have you kind of healed? And is maybe this a part of your healing?
Yeah, it is a part of my healing. Getting this book out in the world, he almost feels like alive sometimes and just disappeared. You know how addicts disappear sometimes. Like, oh, he's just on a trip or something. But I feel him close to me throughout this process with the book. It's an honor for me to be able to bring that out into the world, to honor him and the mission that he had and his legacy that he's leaving behind, that he's left behind. This book will be here on this earth for a long time. And that's why I put pictures in the book. I wanted people to know that it's a real person with real lives that are being affected. And anyway, so it's just an honor to bring that out and to share that with people. And we did my mom and I put 606 flags at the Book Bungalow for Overdose Awareness Day.
Oh, wow.
And it was up for several days, and here in St. George. And 606 people died in Utah from overdose in 2024. And so I'm going to continue to do those things, continue to speak, continue to be part of the recovery days, which is phenomenal. All the activities that they have, like the 5K and everything.
What I hear is like this is kind of giving you purpose.
It's given me purpose, and we're only here on this earth for a short time. And if I can make a difference, even if I don't make a ton of money, I want my life to have purpose as well. And just to spend the rest of my years helping others, really, in some capacity, raising awareness, whatever, reducing the stigma, just bringing more knowledge to people, including myself. I'm still learning.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Definitely, I hear the purpose. I see the purpose. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
If Todd were here today, what would you think he'd want people to know about addiction and recovery based on his book?
Addiction and recovery?
Yeah.
I think what he would want is people to have a little more compassion and show love. Like the last book he was reading was called Love. He felt like people needed to love each other more. He had been shunned and treated so bad in so many different ways just because of his addiction. They didn't see all the beauty within. And it's sad, because addicts do cause problems in that. But we can always come with love. And if your loved one just comes fresh out of recovery, like give them a minute. Like I think we want you to just be better, and we want you to show up, and we want you to embrace us and pull us back in and do all the work. No, it's a family disease, and we all need to work together. And it's not just one person's fault. We all contribute in some way, but just to come with love.
Nice. Yeah, that's beautiful. Absolutely. And I love all that. I totally agree with everything that you're saying. Unfortunately, it is a family disease. It's something that you might not be the one making the decisions, but again, you're contributing in some way, right?
Yep.
I got Al-Anon stuff just ringing in my head, and I don't want to spill out platitudes here, but yeah, that was very well said. Okay, so here you are. We got about 10 minutes, a little bit less than 10 minutes left. There are people who really gain purpose like you that, I've had on this podcast moms that talk about, sons or daughters that have passed away, and I just see the passion, and it's amazing. What advice would you give someone currently supporting a loved one through addiction, right? You said people would tell you need to just leave them. You need to, get out of the relationship. Like, what advice, now that you've kind of been through it? 14 out of 16 years of your marriage, he was struggling, right? What advice would you give someone looking back today?
Yeah, to be willing to do whatever it takes as well, because the addict needs to do whatever it takes. You also can do whatever it takes by reaching out to that hand that's extended to you. It's hard to return a phone call. Return that phone call. If somebody invites you to a meeting, go to a meeting with them. Give it a chance. Like, really be open-minded for your own healing, your own sanity, your own peace of mind. Like, yeah, you're married to this person, but you also have a life to live. And find a way to live that as full as possible. If you're going to stay, find a way to live it as full as possible. If not, the biggest thing I think is that there are so many more resources out there that I could see later that I didn't know were available. There's free programs, different people like myself who have lost a loved one that are waiting and willing to help. Todd would always say, hire an addict in recovery because they'll work harder for you than anybody. Well, you catch a loved one, like a spouse who just lost their husband, and they're knocking on your door, open that door because they'll do amazing things for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well said.
Oh, don't ignore the signs. They're there. Pay attention. In your gut. That's the biggest thing. In your gut something's not right. Reach out. You can't do it alone.
Very well said. Here's what I would maybe add to that, or open our listeners up to. If you're like Steph and you've decided that you're sticking through it, right? People have said whatever they said, leave, get out, whatever, and you're like, no, I recognize this is a disease. I want to help my loved one through it. Learn the lingo. There's a whole language to this. There are, like you said, there's tons of resources. It is a sub-world that if you really chose to look into, and I know that comparisons aren't always fair, but I'm going to throw this out there. If you found out your loved one had cancer, what would you be willing to do? Would you be willing to go to support groups? I'm sure you would. Would you be willing to go to doctor's appointments? I'm sure you would. Would you be willing to learn about
Absolutely.
all the different types of the disease itself, A, and then the treatment protocols for it, B, right? Unfortunately, with addiction, because it's so stigmatized and everybody has an opinion on it, and that's okay, people think it's just as simple as just stop. Just don't do it. And listen, if it was that simple, it wouldn't be what it is today, right? No. Every 1 in 3 people either know someone or have a direct family member who struggles with some form of addiction. So I have this tragic story where, not a tragic, man, I got a lot of tragic stories. I have a story where I was helping an individual, much like I was helping Todd, and he was with his wife. Him and his wife had a couple kids. He was a family man, working man, right? And he had done the active addiction thing, and he was now trying to figure out life in recovery. And our norm is to talk about how we're feeling, talk about our thoughts, talk about our cravings, talk about, right? Because if we just keep it in our head, eventually we're going to act on it. So we got to get it out. We got to dispel that energy. So this individual made the mistake, unfortunately, and there's no blame on anybody, but he made the mistake of saying to his wife, hey, I'm really struggling. I'm going to go to a meeting, right? What she heard was, and given from the loved one's perspective, how many times had he lied to her before? How many times had he said, I'm going to go do something and then come home intoxicated, right? So I see her perspective too, but he said, I'm struggling, I'm going to go to a meeting. What she heard was, I'm thinking about using again, because I think he also said that, like, I'm having thoughts of using, I should probably hit a meeting. Unfortunately, when he got home from that meeting, there was a sheriff's deputy waiting in the driveway, right? And they wanted to search his car, and this thing's tough. It's hard. Tough. But if she would have learned that's normal. Good. If he tells you I'm struggling, if he's telling you I'm having thoughts, if he's saying I need to go to a meeting, maybe say, how can I support you? Can I go with you? Right? Have you called your sponsor? Like, there is a language and a whole subculture to this thing that could really help. Yep. Yeah. Sorry, I hope I didn't take up too much time here.
That's great. Todd said if they're talking about it, then that's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Couple more questions here for you. What would you say to someone grieving with the loss of a loved one due to an overdose from addiction?
Gosh, it's tough because, if somebody died, like you said, of cancer or something, people are going to respond a little different than if they die from an overdose. And I was on a podcast about that subject, how to talk about the loss of a loved one to addiction. It's tough. I mean, there are support groups out there for people who have lost someone to addiction. And I think that's the best place to start, to have those conversations about what you're feeling, because it is a complicated death. It is a little bit different than losing someone to a heart attack or cancer. But reach out to people who understand, that have lost someone. I didn't know anybody that I could talk to, but there are support groups, I think, through the University of Utah.
I was going to say, how did you find them?
Yeah, I found one because the coroner's office had sent an email saying that there's a support group for any kind of death, but then they have different subcategories, and one of those was from overdose, which was helpful because then everybody in there is talking about the same kind of loss, which is different.
Yeah.
They had suicide loss, they had addiction loss, regular loss. Yeah. So I would do that. I would start there. I mean, I'm sorry for your loss. Like, that's just hard to deal with and navigate.
Yeah. I like that. I'm going to use a Tom Brady saying, and, double the joy. When something joyful happens, share it with somebody and divide the pain, right? Get around people, lean into your support group. Yeah, but thank you for sharing, because you've literally, we've both walked through it, right? But yeah, I love that. Steph, thank you so much for coming on. How do people find you? How do people, if they want to get a hold of the book or have you come and speak, how do they get a hold of you? How do they reach out? Is there a website?
Yeah. So my nephew made a beautiful website, dearaddictbook.com, and it has cool resources. I'm going to have resources on there and continue to add them. I want to be a resource advocate. There's also a cool section there where people from the community can write a letter to somebody in recovery, just showing their support from a total stranger. And you just fill out the form. It's super easy. You can be anonymous if you want. You don't even have to sign your name. And anybody can write a letter in. And then when I go and speak, I hand out these letters to the residents.
Can they get a hold of you through your website? We got like 30 seconds.
Everything's on the website. They can reach me on the website, and I'm more than happy to come and speak. And you can buy the book. You can buy the book at the Book Bungalow currently.
And to go and speak, you would just take a donation?
Yep, exactly. Because then
So
it can
if
help
somebody
me
would
do
donate you-
advocacy.
Yep, absolutely. Got you.
Yes.
That's awesome. Love that.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. So treatment centers out there who have family therapy groups, please reach out to Steph. She has a powerful story and she has a lot of resources for them. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Jared.
Okay, we might do this again.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you for joining us today on We Do Recover with Jared Miller.
Help us spread our message of hope. Like, comment, and share.
If you have any topics or ideas for future shows, please share that on our Facebook page.
That Facebook page is We Do Recover with Jared Miller. If you or a loved one needs help, please reach out to us. Again, thank you for listening.
Brought to you by Subs Recovery Center, Rise Up Subs, and the St. George Hilton Garden Inn. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of its sponsors. This has been a production from A Podcast Studio.